Thank you very much for coming. The number of people here is just less than half of the number of people that bought tickets, which reflects the reality that when you're buying a ticket at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, Friday evening at 8 o'clock doesn't seem so problematic, but when it gets to Friday evening at 7 o'clock and you know the World Cup opening ceremony is about to start and will.i.am is going to be singing, you kind of go, Anyway, it's lovely that you came. Thank you very, very much indeed. Mills Soko is one of the authors of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Scenarios for South Africa's Uncertain Future. And what I'm going to do, Mills, is just, there are two forwards to the book. One is by Thuli Madonsela and the other by Rolf Meyer. And Rolf gives a brief description of the scenarios that the authors feel best encapsulate South Africa's future possibilities. The good, the bad, and the ugly, and then there is a fourth as well. The good scenario sees those who support constitutionalism, the rule of law, and reforms aimed at spurring on economic growth, and that's the silent majority of South Africans, putting aside their differences and building a powerful new reform movement at the center of South African politics. In this scenario, South Africa is proudly a constitutional democracy and seeks to build relations with others who share the same values on the world stage. This approach could be taken by a coalition of opposition parties with or without the ANC, or by ANC reformers if they are able to take full control of the party and act decisively. In the bad scenario, the ANC enters into a coalition with the economic freedom fighters and makes concessions to a radical policy platform that includes some nationalization and the seizure of private land by the state. The result will be a rapid and precipitous decline in the country's finances as nationalization is implemented and the prosecution of party bosses for corruption ceases. Malign external actors entrench themselves within the government, and the country abandons the Constitution, abandons democratic values. Investors will flee, sending the currency into free fall and causing hyperinflation, leading to economic collapse. The ugly scenario represents a continuation of the status quo. The ANC remains divided and unable to chart a clear path to reform and the rule of law. The energy crisis continues to accelerate, the economy continues on a path of anemic economic growth, and joblessness continues to rise. Investment continues to underperform, and the government remains wary of the private sector. The fourth scenario is a fistful of sense, which is a close relative of the ugly scenario, except that cronyism rises as elite extraction accelerates and the state loses its attempt to rein in corruption and graft. The result is greater inequality and joblessness, while the elite thrives by extracting rents, legal and illegal, from a sliding economy. And I'm pretty certain that everybody here hopes that the good scenario happens, but my guess is that not too many are confident that it is going to happen. The next line, I think, is important. The future is not preordained. And you're not trying to predict the future, you're trying to set out scenarios, possible scenarios for the future. Rolf Meyer makes the point, as do the three authors, Mills, that Clem Sunter's high road, low road scenario in the late 80s did have an impact, that both the National Party government, according to Rolf, who was part of it then, looked at that low road scenario and said, we don't want that. And the ANC, particularly Nelson Mandela, when shown the high road, low road scenarios, said, we don't want the low road scenario. So it pushed them to that higher road scenario of negotiations, peaceful, relatively peaceful handing over of power. So what are you hoping for from these scenarios?
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, John. So you're right when you say the future is not preordained. But what scenarios do is to enable leaders to look at the various policy choices that they can make and decide on the right political choices. And we have a very good example of the Montfleur scenarios that we are talking about, which were devised by Clem Sunter, which were very influential in terms of convincing both Rolf Meyer and PW and F.W. de Klerk then, and subsequently Nelson Mandela and the ANC leadership, that South Africa was facing a very serious crisis and that action had to be taken to address this crisis. And that is why the choice was the high road scenario, which was essentially aimed at reaching a settlement through a negotiated process, and that we're able to achieve. So this is what we seek to achieve through this process here, this book project, is that we are setting out these scenarios, and we hope the leadership in the key parties, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, and other parties are able to look at the state of governance, the appalling state of governance that we find ourselves in, and are able to make the right choices.
What I'm going to do is just go through the book, the sort of key elements of the book, and get Mills to explain them, and then we will leave some time for questions. Before we get into the scenarios and so on, there are, the authors say, there are rules of the game, and these are the unchanging certainties that will limit possible outcomes to those that are realistic and likely. The rules shape the playing field. And the 5 rules of the game are, number 1, we're moving from dominant party to coalition government. Number 2 is, oh no, I've missed 2 and 3 somehow. Number 2 is no growth without investment, policy predictability, and accountable government. The 3rd rule is that governance success requires the rule of law. The 4th rule is a skilled service and private sector is needed to grow the economy. And number 5, foreign policy alignment with major trading partners will drive investment and trade. Those things, if we don't achieve those things, if we don't play by those roles, then the good scenario is impossible, you're saying?
Yes, that's the essential foundation of the scenarios that we're setting out. If we're unable to meet those, we will not be able to achieve the desired goals that we seek to achieve. And let me add, John, that just to talk about them, I think the most important one is political realignment. We need very clear political realignment in this country, to move away from a political process dominated by one party to one where there is competitive political contest. And we hope that one of the options that we highlight there is of a coalition government, right? A coalition government.
Because you say
yes.
It might not come in 2024,
yes.
But you're absolutely certain that if it doesn't come in 2024, it will come in 2029. So you foresee the possibility that the ANC might just get 50% plus 1 in 2024, but you think no way at all in 2029.
Yeah. But we also see the possibility that the ANC might dip below 50%, which might trigger a panic, which might necessitate that they enter into a coalition, and we are wary of a coalition with the EFF because that might lead to a radical platform, with populist economic policies that might take us the route of Zimbabwe or Venezuela, which is a populist economic policy agenda. We talk about nationalization of state assets and all those kinds of things. Ideally, one would like to see a coalition that would involve a number of parties or at least 2 dominant parties. And there's been talk within certain ANC circles about the possibility of reaching out to the DA to talk about.
Do you really think that's, with the DA having committed itself to this coalition that they discussed over a weekend about a month ago?
Yeah, you never know what happens behind the scenes in politics, John. Right, so what you hear in public and a real politics, what might happen behind the scenes. There is a fraction of influential ANC leaders who are against the ANC going into a coalition with the EFF. Like Snooki Sikalala, who's the chairman of the Veterans League, and others, who are reformist in orientation, and they see the ANC entering possibly in a coalition with the DA given its vast experience of governance, and the ANC have been in governance itself for so many years. But that is not a strong currency within the ANC, but that possibility is there, right? So I think that we are in for a very interesting period in our political cycle, and I would like to see that myself. I would like to see that type of coalition.
So if you look at, again, some of those rules, no growth without investment, policy predictability, and accountable government. We certainly don't have that at the moment, not in any meaningful way whatsoever. Governance success requires the rule of law. The rule of law is honored much more in the breach than in the observance. A skilled civil service and private sector needed to grow the economy. We don't have a skilled civil service. We have skilled people within the civil service, but I don't think we could describe the civil service as a whole as being skilled. And we have an enormous amount of distrust within government towards the private sector. And then, do we have foreign policy alignment with major trading partners? That, again, is an open question at the moment. Then Chapter 3 is the big unanswered question. South Africa's possible future will be decided by how a series of big unanswered questions are resolved. And I'm going to go through them. Well, we've talked a little bit about how will politics play out.
Yeah.
That's one of the big unanswered questions. And your feeling, you're one of a triumvirate of authors, but what's your sense of what will happen in 2024? The ANC governing by itself, the ANC governing with a couple of smaller parties because the ANC gets 47% of the vote and needs the IFP and the National Freedom Party. What do you think is going to happen in 24?
I think with the ascendancy of Paul Mashatile, who is currently deputy president and who's been clearly positioning himself to take over from President Ramaphosa. Paul has a very good relationship with the EFF leadership, and the leadership has been, EFF leadership has been courting him. They're very happy to see Paul there within, the top echelons of government. So if the ANC does not achieve a majority vote, and with Paul in the ascendancy, it's possible. He's a very shrewd backroom dealer. It's possible that he will be inclined towards reaching out to the EFF. But that will have enormous implications because, the EFF is led by Malema, who's the sole leader there and the permanent leader, and who's very ambitious himself, who has presidential ambitions. And when they discuss this deal and the backroom dealing, he'll probably want a deputy president position. And they might also demand certain policy concessions which align with the policy platform of the EFF. So that is highly possible. But I think for as long as the reformist, wing of the ANC, if Ramaphosa is strengthened, is strengthened in his position, and it gets the support of those who matter about the reformist agenda, I think then it might lead to the ANC cobbling these smaller parties in a coalition government.
You don't think that the opposition coalition not led by, because the DA has tried to remove the sense that it feels it's the prefect in the room, but that opposition party, I would think, has very little chance of getting more than a maximum of maybe 35% of the vote.
I doubt that. It's a permutation, but I don't think it's at this stage, it's feasible.
Okay. Another big unanswered question is, can we produce the energy to grow? Thank goodness we've gone from stage 6 to stage 4 load shedding, and we're going to have stage 1 on Monday, but not for the Springbok game against the Scots. We're back to stage 4 for that. And my sense with this is that we're kind of muddling towards getting to a position where we are almost producing the energy to grow, because by hook or by crook, the private sector is producing energy. The reason we don't have stage 10 load shedding at the moment is because in the last year, the private sector has put together 4,400 megawatts of privately generated energy, which is 4 stages of load shedding. If we didn't have that, we would be at stage 8, stage 9, stage 10. So, business, the industrial company, big industrial companies are continuing to produce their own power more and more. The middle class are starting to produce their own power, batteries, inverters, all of those things. So we are kind of heading towards that question being answered in an almost positive way.
Yeah. John, but that's not sufficient. We are limping along, we are muddling through. There's a great deal of pressure from business, and to his credit, President Ramaphosa has recognized the importance of involving business directly in the working groups now that are looking at the whole range of problems that afflict this country. But, the essential ingredient here, is a catalyst to change, is structural reforms of our state-owned enterprises, not piecemeal reforms, structural, fundamental, far-reaching reforms. State-owned enterprises, the energy sector, the water sector, the maintenance and of our water infrastructure, the investment in our water infrastructure, digital communications, energy.
You haven't mentioned transport infrastructure, but that's critical.
And transport, transport, that's very critical, and we're seeing the results of Transnet's underperformance, how that has undermined our export sector, and how that has undermined investment in this country. So South Africa, the first scenario, that's so critical to this country, and the right leadership, the right governance, and the fundamental reform of our economy. That is very important. So what's happening now, we're limping along, we have a Minister of Electricity, and we have the business sector involved and so on, but it's encouraging. We are better than we were like 3 years ago, but we need more. We need more.
Can South Africa attract the investment to grow? I mean, it's a huge question with a very uncertain answer. I have, for the last 20-odd years, worked for a major global consultancy firm with offices in London and New York and Tokyo and other big places, and I've never been quieter than I've been in the last 2 years. What happens is that they have clients who ask them to investigate aspects of a possible investment in South Africa, and I contribute to that report. Yeah. And just, it's nothing happening. Yeah. So that's a sort of very personal response to that question. And I think that there is a significant wait-and-see attitude from international investors who would perhaps like to invest in a stable, in a South Africa in which the good scenario is playing out. If that happens, investment will follow. But it's that chicken and the egg. You've got to establish the good scenario before the investment comes in. The investment's not going to come in while there is still the possibility of the bad scenario or the ugly scenario. Yeah.
It's not only foreign investment, it's also domestic investment that is being constrained here. And one of the single most important areas of concern that have been raised by investors is, and the business sector in general, is the state incapacity, the ability of the South African state, to perform optimally. I'm talking about state institutions, and there's also a concern about leadership and governance, right? So they are interlinked, all this. So those 5 rules we're talking about there, they're interlinked. There's a great deal of interest in South Africa. There's still a great deal of interest, but investors have adopted the wait-and-see attitude to see what is, because it's a very important market. It's an important market, not only on its own domestic terms, but also as a launchpad into the region and the broader African continent. There are big concerns. I don't foresee any significant influx of investment into this country unless dramatic changes take place. There's also uncertainty about how the politics will play out, with the 2024 election coming.
The next unanswered question is, can the state assert legal authority and turn the tide on crime and disorder? And I don't know what you think, but I think probably a lot of people are going, not so sure about that. and if you talk to people whose job it is to monitor this, who are in this field all day, they say there are good things happening, that we mustn't underestimate the hollowing out of the prosecutorial authorities that happened during the Zuma years. And that capacity is slowly being built up. There is the beginnings of cooperation between the private sector in terms of forensic accounting and so on, and making those services available to the state. These are really complex cases because we're all going, we know that so-and-so is a crook, why isn't so-so in jail in an orange jumpsuit? And that's because, why isn't Marcus Jooster in jail? Because it's an incredibly complicated case. And we don't have the capacity to deal with those cases. And I mean, the thought that we are going to be a country where law and order is present more than it's absent in 2 years seems unlikely to me. In 5 years, don't know. In 10 years, don't know. But in 2 years, it hardly seems likely that we're going to turn back the tide of lawlessness which sweeps the country at the moment. What do you think?
Lawlessness is rampant, and I mean, it's concerning the murder rate in this country, completely unacceptable. The other types of crime, interpersonal, contact, crimes. There's organized crime. Crime syndicates, we see this in Joburg now, the hijacking of buildings and all that, And some of these criminal syndicates working in cahoots with some politicians. And so this is a very, very big challenge. And until we have a government that can clamp down mercilessly, on crime, we'll experience the kind of scenarios that have been seen by countries like Mexico and and Venezuela and all that, and that should be completely unacceptable. Crime rates are very high, and I agree with the assertion that it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of things happening. I also speak to a lot of folks within government about some of the
investigating inspectorate is doing good work.
There's a lot.
The SIU is doing good work.
Yes. And so it's South Africa is a fascinating, place. It's Jan Smuts used to say it's not the kind of place that will collapse. Nothing that is best will happen here, and nothing that is worse that is happening. There's always this muddling along, and I think what is required is the political will to deal with crime, because this drives investors away, and it drives South Africans away, who are skilled, who want to make a contribution here, and it cuts across the spectrum, white collar crime, and so it took about 10 years of the Zuma era, right, to destroy the criminal justice system. 10 years. It will take a long time to rebuild, the criminal justice system.
Then you're also South Africa is not an island. It doesn't exist on its own. It exists in a world, and it exists in a world which is increasingly fraught. The sort of global certainties are starting to collapse. This notion of a post-Cold War democratic order, everybody moving towards greater freedom for their citizens, so on, that is being threatened by a wave of populism in every country that you look at. Even the stable Nordic countries are starting to see far-right anti-immigrant parties starting to gain significant percentages of the vote. So to what extent do the possibilities for these scenarios depend on what plays out in the rest of the world?
Yeah. So the different considerations here. So one is the rise of populism. especially in the developed world and even in countries that one considered to be progressive. You are right, but there's also the challenge of the impact of COVID, right? And the collapse of global supply chains and how that affected trade, compounded by the global, what is the great power conflict, between, which has manifested itself in the form of a trade war between the United States and China, but also now with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And then you have other
We've got the
issues
G20, and Xi's not going to the G20
Yes.
because China's not getting on with India. And
Yes.
yeah, so
and then so you have the climate change, and so on. So it's the world has become complicated, right? So it's become very, very complicated, and that might make it difficult. And we see what now with the different, the alignment of allies, with the BRICS summit here. Whoever thought that Saudi Arabia, which is a staunch ally of the US, will decide to join the BRICS grouping? And then who thought that Iran would be allowed into the BRICS grouping, and all those things. So it's very, very difficult to discern how the whole global political and economic landscape is evolving and how that will affect our domestic interests, ability to maneuver domestically and externally. But what I can say is that it makes it more fraught. It makes it difficult to make choices, and I think we need the ability and skill and wisdom, to navigate as a country, to navigate these difficulties.
which do you think is the more likely of the scenarios? I mean, it's been quite depressing, hasn't it, folks?
Yeah.
I mean, listening to this, not a hell of a lot of fun. And in my work, I'm often asked, what's the future of South Africa? I have no idea what the future of South Africa is. But I do think that we have some very important things going for us. We have an independent judiciary. We have a free media. We are often incompetent. We're not as expert. We're not as thoughtful as we should be. But we are able to investigate. We are able to give platforms to people to speak their minds. We have at critical levels, we have an independent judiciary. We have a judiciary that is prepared to take on the state, and for the moment we have a state that is prepared to follow what the judiciary tells it to do. Yeah. We have an incredibly active civil society. I did an event last night where I moderated a conversation between Jonathan Jansen and Thuli Madonsela, and Jonathan uses a phrase, the moral underground, and he talks about this vast force of people of goodwill, people who care about the future of this country, people who want the good scenario to unfold as a moral underground. Incredibly active and committed civil society that we have in this country. So we're not a lost cause. I think it's important to put that on the table now.
Yeah, we're not a lost cause. But John, we've got to contend with what we have currently, rather than what we aspire to. What we have now is we have the ANC as the governing party, and which remains a popular party despite all its weaknesses. And in my view, I think we aspire to have the good scenario, right? Where you have reformists taking control, either as the ANC on their own or in coalition with other reform-minded parties, to drive the structural reform agenda. That's what we aspire to. But that will be dependent on what happens within the ANC. If the reformist bloc within the ANC assumes ascendancy of the
what are the chances of that happening?
We hope. Ramaphosa and those who, and when I say the bloc, it's not just the politicians, but the treasury, the bureaucratic machine, the treasury, SARS, DECO, and all those. They take control of of the state machinery. And it drives ahead. It's in the majority within the party. They drive ahead with this agenda. That's a possibility. Or alternatively, in collaboration with, say, the DA, right, as in a coalition government committed to a reform agenda. But you asked the question, in my view, the one that is likely to...
Is the ugly.
is the ugly.
Where we
which
continue
is essentially
as we are
we
at the
keep
moment.
limping along, we muddle through. Ramaphosa is watching his back, and all those kinds of things. And we still have, the South African Communist Party and other alliance partners wielding sway over certain policy areas and all that. And for me, I think that is the likeliest. It's the persistence of the current scenario, which is very dangerous in the long term. It's different from the bad scenario, which will lead to a precipitous immediate collapse, hyperinflation like Zimbabwe and so on. But the ugly scenario is very insidious, because it gives that.
Because that's what we're in at the moment. So we're in an ugly
it gives you
scenario.
that veneer of progress you're talking about, things are happening and all that and so on. But, the economic stagnation will remain and all that until eventually the outcomes, the final outcomes will be the same as those of the bad scenario, economic decay and all those things, capital flight and all that. So,
we were celebrating the other day, we, the country, people, were celebrating the fact that the growth rate, GDP for the second quarter, was higher than economists had been predicting. It was 0.6% instead of 0.4%. And we're going, wow, growth was better than we expected. It's just, whoa.
And the Chinese are not happy with 5% growth rate. They're used to 8%, 9%, 10%. Yeah.
We haven't talked about education and skills and jobs, young people. Jonathan Jansen said last night, he does not believe that the education system will be fixed in his lifetime. That's how bad he thinks the situation is, that it will not be fixed in his lifetime.
Yeah.
We have a situation, the numbers are clear, that 2/3 of young people under the age of 30 do not have jobs. There is this sense that the July riots, the fact that it happened was not bizarre. The fact that it stopped was quite bizarre, because the volcanic forces underlying this incredible economic and social injustice that exists in this country, it's miraculous. That the streets are not burning 300 days out of every 365.
Yeah. John, 2 points, quick points. To go back to the scenario one, the political will to make tough decisions. When you talk about building a skilled, professional, ethical public service, we have a blueprint for that. We have a blueprint, the National Development Plan, which has a section there talking about how we can build a professional civil service in this country and what needs to be done. And this has been gathering dust. It never gets mentioned. It's mentioned just as mere political rhetoric, but no actions have been taken. And we have a lot of highly talented people who love to work. I teach in a business school. There are a lot of people who want to work in the public service. They say, will I be welcome there? I want to make a contribution. But you see, the public service has been captured by vested interests and cadre deployment. I'm not saying there's inherently wrong, but you've got to get the right people. And I can tell you, we have examples of state institutions that they reflect what we could be as a state. The Treasury is a beacon of excellence. Highly trained folks.
And the minister said, 2 weeks ago at the News 24 summit, that if Treasury had been captured the way that other government departments had been captured, this country would be finished.
Would be finished.
Yeah.
Have SARS, you have even the Department of Trade and Industry are highly capable people. They know how, so we can replicate the experience. We can see it happening here in the Western Cape, how you can build a competent public service here in the Western Cape administration. There's nothing miraculous about it, but it needs the kinds of decisions that the ANC has failed to make to date, to really transform the civil service, make it highly competent and highly professional and highly skilled and highly responsive to the needs, of the populace. The issue of this is the single biggest threat that faces this country, social threat, is the high youth unemployment rate. It's the single, if I were to identify that, it's a powder keg situation, it's a ticking time bomb, and the youth are restless and restive, and as we saw, in Egypt and in other Arab countries, this could eventually lead to a very serious social situation that could really bring the country down in a big way. And the July unrest, we saw how that manifested itself, the anger of the youth, the deep frustration, and also the rejection of the status quo, the authority, and until you address that, we have a problem. But we can't address that until you address the education system as well, you see? So these issues and problems are interlinked, and they need a kind of leadership that can deal with them in the most decisive way, and we don't have that currently. So
when you have in 2018 482 schools with pit toilets across the country, and in 2023 you have 10 fewer schools, so in 10 schools have had their pit latrines taken away from them. That's got nothing to do with competence. That's got nothing to do with structural deficiencies. That's got to do with not caring.
And it's also about self-hate. So when you have a director general in education who earns more than R1 million, stealing money, designated for school feeding schemes, right? So this is self-hate. You say you hate the people you're serving, and you're also hating yourself. This is what Steve Biko spoke about, psychological, liberation. So the problem, you're right, is deeper than competence and so on, but it's also the mindset. The mindset. If you take, for instance, some schools that have done very well in the most rural of areas in Limpopo, where they don't have the facilities that schools in Soweto have, but you wonder, why is the school done so well? Why has it achieved the 100% matric pass rate? And you see, it's the role of the school principal, the role of the teachers, the solidarity among learners and the discipline and all those things, It's a mindset issue. It's not just, those are mindset issues. So it's not just about changing the way we go, but the mindset. And the president of Botswana, I was in Botswana recently, and he's adopted this as national policy. We need to change the mindset of Botswana, right? Because we are doing very well, but we could do better if we change the mindset of Botswana. And everybody's talking about this. You meet with companies, they say we're changing the mindset. You meet with, everybody's talking about what President Mosisi, has outlined in terms of his national vision.
Mills, before we go to questions, which we will very shortly, I don't want the people in this audience tonight to make the first order of business once they leave to contact an immigration lawyer. We don't want that. We want you to stay. We want you to contribute to the good scenario. So what are the things around in South Africa that make the good scenario, if not definite, but at least possible, maybe even verging on probable? What are the strengths that we have that we can build on in order to ensure that the ugly scenario, which we're living through at the moment, slowly, because it's not going to happen overnight, we have to accept that, but that ugly scenario that we're moving through at the moment starts to become more and more like the good scenario.
Yeah. Firstly, we have incredible infrastructure. You know, when the quality of infrastructure in South Africa is incredible even by global standards. I've seen, you know, our road network, our ports, our airports, our incredible infrastructure. Compared with even in some cases, some states in the United States, I've been to, where you see, wow, we're doing better than this, or even in countries that, which a lot of countries don't have, right? So we have infrastructure, which other countries don't. And then we have an incredible, highly competitive financial services industry, which by global, it ranks amongst the top 5, right? Our financial services industry is our biggest strength. And then we have, you know, globally competitive companies, you know, world-class companies for a country of its size, right? Compared with comparable size with Argentina and Brazil, South Africa has by far, you know, highly competitive, you know, global companies. We've got highly talented people, right? I was making a point that when South Africans are pushed to the corner, you know, when they have their backs to the wall, they rise to the occasion. And I use the example of how we're able, it's something which I thought was incredible, how this country was able to host the BRICS summit, where you had over 60 heads of state and government, right? Under one roof. That's a logistical nightmare by any standards. To do it so seamlessly for a country of our size, that was just incredible. And everybody has remarked about that. We've had our convening power. It's not just the BRICS summit, but you talk about the World Cup, rugby, you talk about Africa Cup of Nations. South Africans are highly capable and skilled, and they can do things, right? It's a very important resource we need to tap to. And we have a fantastic climate. We have a fantastic climate which many countries don't have. We're here in Cape Town now. This city, I lived in the UK for many years. I did my PhD there. I could have chosen to remain there, but I came back because, you know, I'm very patriotic and I love this country. And I couldn't live in the I love going there to see them, but my heart is here. So you have highly talented people, but also highly patriotic people who love this country, who want to make it work. So these are some of the assets that we have, which make us, tick, which make us unique, and all is not lost. It's not doom and gloom, right? There are countries far worse than us.
The future is not preordained.
Yeah, but the future is not preordained, and there are countries that are going through serious problems, even those we think represent greener pastures. You know,
I was reading an article in the Times of London this morning that in the past year, 130 British councils have declared bankruptcy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you see the problems in the United States, you know, very serious problems. You see the problems in Eastern Europe. So I have faith in this country. That's why we co-authored this book, because we have faith in this country. We want to make it work. South Africans want to remain here. They want to make this country work. And you know, there's a very important, another asset, agriculture, our agricultural sector. Even at the height of COVID, this is the only sector that did very well and still does very well today. Very well organized, highly competent, very sophisticated. That is why there is this deluge of countries, including Russia now. They want to attract South African farmers. You know, they're all poaching, and because they can see that, you know, we have a really, really viable and formidable agricultural sector. So we have very strong advantages, we have strong capabilities. We just need the right leadership and the right governance to pull it together. South Africa's problem is leadership and governance. Right? It's leadership and governance.
One of the, because the fact that you're here tonight means that this matters to you and that you're having conversations about these sorts of things with your friends, with your business colleagues, with your family, and so on. One of the great values of a book like this is that it gives you the facts, it gives you the statistics, it gives you the trends which allow you to think more deeply about these issues. I mean, there's an enormous amount of information packed into what is quite a slim volume. Okay, questions for Mills?
Hello, ma'am. Go ahead.
Would you mind, because
all
we're
right.
recording everything, so would you mind just, okay, there, and then another one over there. Yeah.
As you said, quite depressing, but I'm glad we've ended on a semi-positive note there. But I just wanted to know how, with the BRICS delegates coming over, and how the Western world seems to recognize so easily that India is the new kind of emerging superpower and the one power we should be cozying up to. And yet we virtually ignore that delegate, but, cozy up to China, who's got its own struggling economy and, top-heavy population. So, if the world can see that, why can't the government see that?
China is a first among equals within the BRICS formation, within the BRICS grouping. China is the second largest economy in the world, which after the United States. So it's a very significant country. And it is South Africa's single largest trade partner. Right? China is very significant. We cannot ignore China. But we also have relations with India, which India, historical, cultural, and India is our fifth largest trade partner. I don't think South Africa is snubbing India. I think what the president was doing was to accord President Xi Jinping, the status of the president of a major country, and there was a coincidence there, so that the BRICS was taking place at the same time as he was hosting the state visit by President Xi. That is why I went to receive him at the airport. Of course, Prime Minister Modi took exception to that, but those things happen in politics and in diplomacy. They would have been sorted out. India is very critical to South Africa. China is critical to South Africa. The United States, and I'm glad that the spat between South Africa and the United States has now been resolved, because that was a major concern. The United States is our major trade and investment partner. We cannot ignore the United States. The United States is one of the largest investors in South Africa. If I to quantify American investment in South Africa, it accounts for about 10% of South Africa's GDP, right? And the American companies, there are over 600 American companies. Some have been operating here for over 100 years. And they employ over 220,000 people, over 200,000 people. So I thought that was completely unacceptable that there was this spat. And we have benefited immensely from AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which enables us to export to the United States duty-free and tariff-free. We export motor cars to the US, we export wine, we export nuts, we export platinum, and so on. So we cannot undermine the relationship with the United States. And that was a big blot on our foreign policy. And so is the EU. EU is very important as a major export destination for our agricultural products in particular. So the key thing is this: we need to have a very independent foreign policy as a country, right? We should not be beholden to China or US. We should make those choices. We have good relations with all of them, but not be beholden to any of them, not be held to ransom by any of them. Be it China or, that is the problem I have with our foreign policy. We need to be able to navigate, the tricks, some of these countries get up to, and so on. So I don't think we've snapped India. That was a coincidence, and the president wanted to accord President Xi the respect that he had, as a significant leader, the second largest economy in the world. And with one of the fastest growing economies, I disagree with you when you say China has achieved within a generation, 30 years. It used to be a backwater. When Mao Zedong died in 1970, it was a backwater. Within 30 years, it was able to transform itself and modernize and to become the second largest economy in the world.
Yeah, they're very upset that they're growing at 5% instead of 9%. Which is, there was another question over here somewhere. There we go. Get the mic, thank you. I mean, I think it's fascinating what's happening between China and India at the moment. President Xi deciding not to go to the G20 in India, and how that's going to play out over the next decade or so is going to be intriguing.
Thank you. This is a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it. But maybe it can be said that politicians aren't economists, so they don't base their decisions on this book. So how do you force politicians to read this book and act on it? Because, politician thinks about the next 4 years. They don't think about the next 20 years.
So our intention is to, that's a very important question, how do we get this message out there? So we intend to engage with various sectors in society, with organized business, in a form of sort of sessions where we'll present the findings of the book, what the book is all about, and engage in workshops. But also, to do this kind of thing with politicians, you need to be very selective. You need to initially identify the reformist politicians and get them to understand the message that is here and what can be achieved, and then later you can broaden it. So this is a tireless job. It's something that we need to do on a continuous basis. So the different fora, the directors general forums and so on, where we want to to access those and make sure that we're able to convey the messages that are contained in the book and get them on board, to support the vision that we are espousing especially the scenario one vision, of structural reform and good governance and the rule of law and all that.
I'm sorry, I was on my phone because I was looking for a quote that I read earlier this morning from a senator and representative in the United States who died quite a few years ago, and he said if more politicians in this country were thinking about the next generation instead of the next election, it might be better for the United States and the world, and that applies equally, I think, to us here in South Africa. Is there another? Yep. Can we get the mic over here? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Mr. Mills, for me, one of the hardest things on these scenarios is when you look at DA, for instance, and EFF as opposition parties. If you understand politics, they're not offering an alternative politically. They're just pushing ANC in the corner because ANC is playing badly. When you look at far right, far left, ANC had great policies. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken us out of apartheid. So there's something good there, but the leadership is horrible, I agree. Now, my worry then is that there's no one that's offering anything politically strong in terms of on the table. And we are just worried about this chaos that ANC has caused. But ANC as an organization, in my understanding, is that the policies that were offered, we all agreed, even when Codesa happened, you could tell that those were well crafted, informed by the world, actually. So how then do we keep what's good on paper and remove the bad people that are policing what's good? So that's my one question. Because otherwise, if you go left or right, you're not getting anything that's going to help us. It divides. One side divides, the other side divides. There is one side that kept us in the center. It's now messing up that center. So how do you save what's on paper, remove the bad people, bring in the right people to govern, and make the country work? Because what's on paper works. It's universally sound. It's based on all of us sharing. It addresses the issues of the past, the pains. That thing was well crafted. It carries the energy of the people. But the people managing it and delivering on it are horrible, I agree. So that's one part. The second part of my question is, now that people have understood that they can mess up the cycle, social unrest, and sort of push people to use anger, how safe are we from ANC when it loses doing what National Party did when it turned IFP and against ANC? How safe are we for ANC fighting to lose, that it will end up playing ugly? So I'm worried also about that, because now that the youth is not employed, there is more machinery you can now deploy to destroy and not build. How safe are we for ANC when it loses, to lose kindly and allow the next politics? Because then on paper, you are then worried about what's on paper. They could turn back and say, but if EFF wins, we are all back to bad scenario. If DA wins, so it's those two things for me.
Yeah.
How do we keep what works and deploy the right people to govern? Because in any case, ANC was never a governing party. It was a revolutionary party. Now that we are saved, how then do you keep the things that work? If then ANC loses, how do we keep us safe from ANC playing evil on its people because of politics?
Yeah. Very important questions. Let me start with the first one. The EFF, without doubt, is a very popular party, especially with the youth, because of the message, sort of the radical message, that it conveys, nationalization and all that. And the youth are vulnerable and they're desperate. And so this is a captive audience for that kind of rhetoric. My concern with the EFF is that they don't have any discernible governance experience. They've never governed anything, right? All they do is influence coalition arrangements and then destroy them or disrupt them and start afresh. So they don't have any governance experience. That is a big concern, apart from my concern about the policies and all that. What I find attractive, the DA, I have my own issues with the DA, and I've had many spats with Helen Zille in the past when I was in the Western Cape and so on. But I also respect the governance pedigree, right? The governance experience of the DA. One cannot, you cannot brush that away. They can govern. They know how to run state institutions. And there's so much we can learn from them. The roads are clean, traffic lights work, all these things. I'm telling you, it's so refreshing to come to this city and to this province. It's refreshing because, Gauteng now, it's a mess. So the ANC also has governance record, albeit patchy in some respect, and also troubling in others, right? But they've been in government since 1994. So if you can have these two parties forming a centrist coalition, because the ANC is a center-left party and the DA is a center-right party, and they can form a centrist coalition with a clear policy agenda, borrowing from each other's, and then we need governance. South Africa is crying out to be governed, right? So this is what attracts me about that potential formation. Now,
Mills, I'm sorry, we do have to
we have to
close at 9 because venue needs to be closed up and so on. So the possibility of the ANC not losing kindly, I love that phrase.
Yeah.
So very quickly, if you could address
very
that
quickly,
question.
Very quickly. That takes us to the Zimbabwe scenario and the political military nexus, which I don't foresee in South Africa. You know, South Africa is too complicated for that. You know, with the strong judiciary, the media, civil society, business, and also, you know, the tradition of activism. That would be. I don't see that happening in the same way as is happening in Zimbabwe, where civil society is completely destroyed, and it's only the dominant party that runs the show.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for coming. I hope you leave in a slightly better frame of mind than you were in 20 minutes ago. Mills Soko, thank you very much. I don't know if the book's still on sale. I don't know if I think the books might have been packed away by now, but if you have a book, I'm sure Mills would be very, very happy to sign it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.